In this video, we'll outline the most important content of the articles by Christopher Martin, The Agile Supply Chain, Competing in Volatile Markets, the article by Pagh and Cooper, Supply Chain Postponement and Speculation Strategies, How to Choose the Right Strategy, and Fisher-Marshall, What is the Right Supply Chain for Your Product? So first, let's start with an article by Martin Christopher. So when we look at the problems addressed, it's a lot about the unpredictability and volatility of today's turbulent global markets, as well as the shortening business life cycles, which basically call for an alternative concept of designing and adapting our supply chains. So what he wants to do, he wants to make supply chain managers aware of the need for agile supply chains. So the research question hence is, what is agility and how should today's companies consider this in the design of their global supply chains? When it comes to the research design, well, there's actually no real research in this article, but it's rather descriptive and it elaborates a concept without real research implication. From a theoretical approach, again, it's more like describing a theory and giving or explaining it based on the example of Zara. Um, The article starts by defining agility, and it's defined as a business-wide capability that embraces organizational structures, information system, logistic processes, and mindsets. So agility is basically the ability of an organization to respond rapidly to changes in demand, both in terms of volume and variety. A very important aspect is stressed here that agility and lean are not the same. When we look at agility, a key characteristic is flexibility and maneuverability, while lean is more about doing more with less. Agility can be explained as nimble, while lean is more containing little fat, or what we called it earlier, waste. Agility or an agile supply chain is needed in less predictable environments where demand is volatile and the requirements for variety is high, while lean works best in high volume, low variety, and predictable environments. We can see here on the right a figure which helps us to determine whether we need an agile or a lean supply chain. Also, it's argued that leanness is an element of agility in certain circumstances. This can mean that many companies adopt a lean strategy without even being agile. Overall, agility is a lot of responsiveness to changing circumstances, and an important aspect is also postponement of product assembly, which I will elaborate later. There are certain circumstances, however, where a hybrid strategy is needed. So, for example, if we have a mixed product portfolio where there are some products with unpredictable demand, there we have to be more lean, while we have some products with more predictable demand that we try to be more agile. The key characteristics of an agile supply chain are the following. First of all, market sensitivity, which is the capability of reading and directly responding to real market demand. Then we have the virtuality, which is basically making use of information technologies such as EDI and the internet to share demand information among supply chain partners. We have process integration, which is basically the necessity for collaborating with your suppliers in order to jointly develop products and determine common strategies, but also have some shared systems in place in order to share the information. And lastly, it should be network based, which is the capability of leveraging the strengths and competencies of each network partner. Another important concept is the decoupling point, or also called order penetration point, which is the point to which real demand penetrates upstream in a supply chain, or in simple words, it's basically where the demand becomes visible. And the further up the demand becomes visible, the easier it is for us to forecast, of course, and adapt our strategy and our stock to the demand, to the real market demand. So the decoupling point in this graph is made visible through the triangles. And hence, yeah, we can argue that the aim of agility is to carry inventory in a generic form as far as possible and postpone the final assembly as far downstream as possible. So the flow up to the decoupling point, so basically from here to here, may be forecast driven, but from the decoupling point downwards, it should be demand driven, so based on real demand coming from the markets. When we achieve this, we can have a couple of very positive advantages. So generic parts are kept in stock instead of the finished products, so the assembly of the final product can be based on real demand. Hence, we can reduce stock keeping variations and have less inventory overall. This enables us also to have more flexibility for greater variety in product based on the real demand, because you keep the generic parts in stock, and as soon as you have the real demand, you can just assemble your final product. Also, forecasting becomes easier at the generic part level than at the finished product level. Furthermore, postponement enables us to offer a higher level of variety at lower costs. And when we say this, we're talking about mass customization, because once you know the final or the real demand, you can just assemble the product based on the needs of the customer. And overall, this will reduce the bullwhip effect. The challenge, however, is here, as I already mentioned earlier, to develop lean strategies up to the decoupling point and agile strategies beyond the decoupling point. When it comes to the decoupling point, again, there's um, two different decoupling points. We have the material decoupling point, which is strategic inventory held in as generic form as possible, and this material decoupling point should lie as far downstream the supply chain as possible, so it's closer to the final marketplace. But also we have the information decoupling point, which should lie upstream in the supply chain. So it should be the furthest point to which information of real demand penetrates, because the earlier in the supply chain we have the information of real demand, the easier it is for us to forecast and adapt our strategy. As already mentioned earlier, a very important aspect is also building strong partnerships through multiple links. So we want to be very connected to some strategic suppliers among functional areas. So there should be some key suppliers identified, and we should keep close relationships to those. Also, we don't want to have too many key suppliers, because then it's getting complex again. And with these key suppliers, we should share the information through IT information systems, and this requires to put mistrust away. All this will enable us to reduce the complexity in the system, and hence be more flexible and respond to changing customer demands. So to come to an end, we can conclude that in today's challenging business environments, where volatility and unpredictable demand becomes the norm, it is essential that the importance of agility will be recognized. And hence, this article is also, as it was issued in the Industrial Marketing Management magazine, I would assume that it is addressed to supply chain executives of global companies, in order to make them aware of the need for the adaptation of their supply chains in order to make them more agile.
So let's go on with the next article. What is the right supply chain for your product? And it's by Marshall L. Fisher. So in this article, the problem addressed is that the framework to optimize supply chains are better than ever. However, the performance of the supply chains have never been worse due to a mismatch between the type of product and chosen supply chain. So managers basically lack a framework for making the right decisions regarding the supply chains. So the research question, how can managers learn to take the right decisions in the supply chain, ensuring that product type and supply chain type is aligned? There's no research, but it's rather descriptive, this article, and it elaborates on this concept without uh, real research implication. And the theoretical approach is the way that it's a description of a theoretical concept exemplified through a few cases. So first of all, we have to understand the basic difference between functional and innovative products. A functional product is one that has stable demand, long life cycle, and but with low profit margins due to the high amount of competition. Innovative products, on the other hand, has unreliable demand, short life cycles, but with high profit margins. So they are uh, two complete different types of products. Now, the important thing here is that when we go through the two sections here, I'm not going to run you through all of them because that would be a bit tiresome. But the point is that a functional product basically is something that is very basic. It's something that is where you want to produce it in high volumes at a low cost and with, of course, with the necessary quality. It's also something that you can predict. It's stable, which has a huge impact on the supply chain that you would want to have for a functional product. An innovative product, on the other hand, has a really low life cycle, really high contribution margin, but a lot of errors when forecasting, and you need to do much more markdowns. So here you just want to have you basically just want to be much more you want to be able to respond to the demand that you have, because for innovative products you don't really know what the demand is going to be like, and that's why it's hard to adjust your or to construct your supply chain for it. So therefore the author comes up with two concepts of supply chain: a physically efficient supply chain and a market responsive supply chain. Now these two can be compared to lean and agile. Uh, in the sense that a physical efficient supply chain is a supply chain that ensures that raw material, or that's the part of the supply chain where you ensure that raw materials are transformed and transported where needed at the lowest at the lowest cost, with low inventory and high utilization rate, and with low cost suppliers, etc. Now, a market responsive supply chain would be one where or is the part of the supply chain where you ensure that customers get the right products in the right amounts and in the right quality. Uh, and that's also where, since the demand is of course made up by it's from the coming from the downstream side, and and since you can predict the demand, you want to focus on the market responsive part of your supply chain, because that is where you can really make a difference and really get that competitive edge. And you do so by having buffer stocks, by having a low lead time, and by having a high variety of products, etc. So that this brings us to this square where we can understand how a functional product suits an efficient supply chain, and an innovative product suits a more responsive supply chain. So when we think of a company such as Lego, they would uh, they say themselves that they prefer to have a more responsive supply chain with high quality. So that's also something we can see here in the match in the lower right corner, because Lego's demand is a forecast, and they do not really know how much Lego they're gonna sell, uh, because it's hard to find out exactly what children around the world is going to demand, and if a product is popular or not. So in that sense, this is an example of what the author means by match and mismatch in the square. He brings up two cases, one for Campbell and one for National Bicycles. It's basically one example of how a company um, were able to collaborate with suppliers um, and get a much more and achieve a much more efficient supply chain, um, instead of making price promotions and other things that would be more related to to an innovative product. National Bicycles, on the other hand, did the opposite, went from a very efficient supply chain to a more responsive one, because they started focusing on a new segment in the market that wanted a higher variety of different bicycles, but also at a higher price. So in the end, the conclusion of this article is that managers should really just focus on realigning their supply and product design in order to improve their competitiveness. The article was issued in the Harvard Business Review and it addresses supply chain managers.
We represent is the postponement and speculation strategies, how to choose the right strategy by Pagh and Cooper. This article addresses the problem of whether manufacturing and logistic managers should use a postponement, speculation, or a hybrid as a supply chain strategy. The research question can be stated as what are the pros and cons for the four generic PS strategies and how can the profile analysis support the managers to select the most applicable for their firm. The definition of the concept of postponement strategy. In the literature, the concept was originally proposed by Alderson and later expanded by Buckland. The logic behind postponement is that risk and uncertainty costs are tied to the differentiation of goods that occurs during manufacturing and logistic operations. The postponement strategy acts as a branch to five strategies made by Cooper, Sin, and Bowersox. The strategies are the bundled manufacturing strategy, the unicentric strategy, the deferred assembly strategy, and they all together is the fifth strategy. The converse concept of postponement is speculation. Speculation makes it possible to gain economies of scale in manufacturing and logistic operations and limit the number of stocks out. The distinctive characteristics of postponement strategy are the centralized inventories and producing goods by customers' orders, whereas speculation is producing the goods in advance and then ship it to then decentralized inventories. The 2x2 matrix of generic supply chain strategies illustrates variations of manufacturing and logistics. The most used strategy is the full speculation strategy. It is based on inventory forecasts and therefore full speculation of all manufacturing and logistics is practiced. Generic supply chain strategies illustrates variations of manufacturing and logistics. The most used strategy of the four is the full speculation strategy. It is based on inventory forecasts and therefore full speculation of all manufacturing and logistics processes. The consequence of employing the full speculation strategies are the difficulty to generalize the goods. Some points are, however, rather obvious because full manufacturing and logistic economies of scale can be achieved since products can be both manufactured and distributed in large lot sizes. Examples of companies that don't use full speculation are many. HP enjoys low inventory costs as they use the manufacturing postponement strategy. Some Swedish companies make use of logistic postponement strategy. And finally, the Danish company B&O uses the postponement strategy, full postponement strategy. Even though this matrix shows a clear-cut pros and cons, then the four generic strategies should not be perceived as fixed strategies, because very often the companies use hybrids instead. To ease the selection of the most applicable strategy for manufacturing and logistic manager, then the profile analysis can be conducted. It is conducted by pinpointing the attributes of the company in the presented spreadsheet. The next thing you have to do is that he should connect the marked attribute with drawing a line. As more straight as the line is, the more clear-cut is the strategy. As a conclusion to this paper, then the different PS strategies have ambiguous impact on the firms because the PS strategies have to be customized to the individual variables as product, market and demand, and manufacturing and logistics. The audience of the discussed paper is practitioners and academics, as it was published in the Journal of Business Logistics.